Welcome to the October 2nd, 2018 Scituate Zoning Board meeting. This is, let's see. Where is it? This is continuing from August 30th. Hearing Brook Meadows LLC requests a modification of the comprehensive permit for Herring Brook Meadows LLC, according to Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 20-23. Request to change is on file with the ZBA for the project located at 26 and 32 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, Scituate, Mass. And also at this point, last meeting we did close the hearing, so there's no more public input now. So most of our discussion is going to be about our decision and running it back and forth from Jay. So everyone is welcome to listen, but again, it is closed for input at this point. So, I don't know if, well, do you want to start, or Jay, do you want to start with any highlights?
First of all, thanks to the project team. What we did to draft the decision initially is I gave them the permit we just did recently on that smaller project. They used that as a basis for drafting the decision. So they did that. They got most of the boilerplate that we wanted for that, and they added some more things and some conditions, most of which is, as you know, those of you that have done this with me before, which most of you at least once, and Sarah and Ed more than once. There's a lot of boilerplate in the conditions, but thanks much to Jeff and Bob and Stephanie for putting that together. So then I took that and kind of went through it, moved some things around a little bit, more form than substance, added in a few conditions that the board felt strongly about kind of coming in those last two meetings, especially some of the landscaping things, some of the other little bits and pieces, nothing much. Then went back to the team, and Stephanie and Jeff and Bob returned something back this afternoon that had mostly form edits, nothing much, a little bit of tweaking some lawyer things here and there, and nothing that really concerned me that much. I turned around and edit. I had an opportunity to do it. I wanted to make sure you guys had the latest and greatest, so I turned that around by early this afternoon and sent you a clean version as well as a red line version. It's in pretty good shape. Bob and I and Stephanie discussed one item where they had a concern, and we can get into that. But otherwise, I don't know how the board wants to proceed. The first three sections are description and procedure and history and the basic findings, nothing out of the ordinary. It's all sets up the conditions, and then it's the conditions. We can kind of roll through the conditions, we can go through the other parts, whatever is the board's pleasure here.
I think that'd be a good idea to quickly roll through the decision. Roll through the conditions.
So for me, I think if I'm good with the property description, it made sense to me. If they're good with it, I think maybe we could put that.
Yeah, I think.
And then just start at the conditions.
They did a good job. I kind of.
Right, yeah, maybe that's what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I redefined a few things based on the latest plans. They agreed with that. They actually added some additional detail on some of the property description that I thought was helpful to frame it out. So I think we're good. We got the history down together. They used a little bit of different nomenclature, but nothing significant. You know, their original draft had a longer procedural history, and I just kind of cut to the chase a little bit with that and kind of shrunk that up. And then the findings, most of the findings are pretty generic, with the exception of the few that set up some of those conditions on like the final landscaping plans that we still have forthcoming. What were some of the other ones? Nothing really that significant, because most everything was worked over. Final architectural plans, which we all recognize at the close of the hearing, we would need to see that, but I set that up so I have a finding that corresponds to the condition that we'll get those administratively without a public hearing, just to make sure that you guys get a chance to review them before they go to building permit stage, but nothing particularly significant there. So it was like landscaping and architectural were the two boxes we needed to check, and then the rest of it is a lot of stuff that really measures and kind of sets forth a process whereby Woodard and Curran and the building commissioner and this board will be getting information, and so that the applicant knows what they have in front of them for building and getting their other permits and everything else like that. So, happy to go through any one of the sections or all of the sections.
I have one kind of way in the front on, I think it's like page 3, what your new paragraph 7. Page 2? I think it's all part of the first section.
The applicant possesses an interest in the site by virtue of the
Right.
fact that it is entered in purchase and sale agreement?
Right, well, it's the last sentence. Is there, it says that jurisdictional requirements have been satisfied provided that SEB closes on such proposed sale. Is there a date or deadline that needs to be?
I'm not super concerned about that because the permit is 3 years. So they're essentially getting a 3-year permit here. So they've got to close to have the site control. They obviously aren't going to go forward with the purchase. So I think it all happens on their own timeline, however they want to deal with that. Whatever's convenient to them.
I can answer that. I mean, our purchase and sale runs for the length of the time it takes us to be completely permitted, no appeals. So we have site control right through the whole process, so that means we're eligible under that section. If we had in fact had a due date and we missed it and we suddenly lost site control, the point would be well taken, which is, hey, we don't have site, we're not eligible anymore, but we don't have that situation. We're covered for the duration.
So I didn't have too much, but it's a good question. The requirements for site control are somewhat minimal under 40B. We want to make sure that they have, during the permitting stage, the color of title, which is the PNS. And obviously, when they go to the building commissioner for a permit, he's going to want to see that they're the owner at that point.
I could add also to what Jay said. First of all, we're very grateful that he turned this around so quickly. That's very helpful because we got it after we did an initial look through, and he turned it around to us, and then we turned it around to him, and he turned it right around back, which was very helpful. And frankly, we are not going to argue about any issues. I mean, we think the permit is good. The only issue we had, which we talked about briefly, was, we can talk about it, this issue of having to rent out all the affordable units in a 1-for-4 position. And, through initial lease-up, we can do that. It's just that my son runs all these programs, and sometimes at the very end of the process, you may be short having a couple of units that you got to fill with the affordable, and you've screened everybody and they don't qualify and you're back in the market. We don't want to be held up renting the last few units until we get that last person in. But we'll deal with that. So I'm even saying that that's okay the way he wrote it.
After talking to Bob and Stephanie about that, I have it as a 1 in 4, which you've seen before, Sarah, and to give them a little bit of leeway in case they get a little ahead of the market. I changed
the
it.
1 in 4.
So that would mean you can't rent a 4th market rate unit until you rent the first affordable unit, and so on. Or if you have 8 units out there on the market, 2 of them have to be affordable, something like that.
Percentage.
Just so that they don't get to 45 market rate units, not that this group would do that, but 45 market rate units and have rented no affordable units, and the incentive tends to decrease to do that. We want it to be mixed income throughout and to have that flavor. One thing that I do periodically to allow them to get ahead of it, because the market rate units may go quicker, the affordable units may go quicker, we don't know. But I just, for example, changed this to 2 out of 8. So if they want to get 6 market rates in because the market gets hot, it initially allows them to jump ahead a little bit. So I play with that a little bit.
What section is that?
That's in section 4, so kind of jumping forward. 19 seconds? The last sentence of 19, I think.
We have no problem with that, because it's says it's during the initial lease up, and we're required to market 6 months ahead of time. We get all those people lined up and ready to go. But as you know, the window of opportunity or band of income for people is pretty narrow. So you've got to qualify. You may get 100 people, and you may end up with 50. You've got to qualify a lot of people. At the end of the day, you've got to get all 15 in. So we don't know how that's going to work. It happens in every town. My son has at least 100 projects that he's working on like this. But he'd hate to have his hands tied. If we had 2 affordable units, we were back in the market, we were working hard, we advertised, we could show you our work, and we couldn't get those last 1 unit, 2 units done. We didn't want to hold up the market. That's a worst case scenario, but I'm just raising that as a question. What would we do? I suppose we could come back and say to you, could we have a minor plan change? Because here's all our evidence, and we've got a couple of units.
So we have that, I have that situation right now in the town of Douglas, and what the applicant does, and it's happened now 2 or 3 times, is that their situation is even more, they had a much harder time just given their geographic locations. And then he comes in and says, hey, will you guys vote? Presents it as an insubstantial change. I promise you, we have this marketing, gives us evidence of how hard he's working. Can you let me get a couple occupancy permits out here? So if we did 2 out of 8, and you leave open the possibility for them to pay a visit to you and say, hey, I got a couple people that are lined up ready to go, here's what we're doing to get those affordable units, and then you give them the relief.
I don't expect an issue, but that would be helpful, just to have the 2 and 8.
So I think that change is fine.
I think the 2 and 8 compromise is reasonable.
I think so.
Because it keeps the percentages the same, but gives you a little more working room.
That's fine.
And then if those aren't there for some reason, then you would have to come back. So,
Yeah.
again, it might,
The only other issue procedurally I'd raised, Jay mentioned that you have to sign off on the final architectural plans, which we turned in after the hearing was closed, so technically they're not in the record. We will turn those in again to you, because you have a 40-day, 45-day review on those plans, which you probably haven't done yet. So we will turn them in after we're permitted. You have all that time to look at them. It's not the final drawings, it's the final architectural schematics that you got after the fact. And it was reflected in this decision as you have 45 days, you could have another 30 if you needed it. We're all fine with that. All we're saying is we can get that going pretty quickly. We don't have to wait 6 months to have you look at those plans, so.
And the plans you're referring to are the schematics, not the final, not the plans to be submitted to the building department.
Correct.
Right, not the building
Because
stuff.
It's not the building plan, not the
I
CEL.
want to make sure.
Final
Yeah.
schematic plans, which is what I interpret the language in there.
Yeah, it just says our elevations, floor plans, and units.
Yeah.
So.
So we'll get those into you right away. You already have them, we'll give them to you again. And you have the time to look at them.
And just pick it up at your next meeting, put it on the agenda, make sure it's just basically consistent.
Yeah,
with
we
what
might
you
want to
said.
ask for it in that submittal is, those are tough to read on email, so we might have, at least a couple of full sets to look at, review, so that we can glance through them
Right.
and see it at the scale.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's it, that's all we got.
And I'm sure that won't be any more than 5 or 6 pages.
That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're not working drawings, you don't have to get that many pages, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I set up the final landscaping as well, they've done most of the landscaping in terms of around the buildings and the kind of ornamental kind of side, and they'll give something a little more final. And then gave them the flexibility that they requested to continue to work with the neighbors and develop something with the screening, especially with respect to car lights. I reference all that, I pulled that right out of my notes from the last session, so there's that condition as well.
And we already we've been back and forth with the neighbors, we're trying to get a date, we're ready to sit and talk to them, so that's all in process. So we're okay with all that, because we'll work that out, so we're not avoiding it.
And the rest of it is, you guys know, is all set up with, I kind of set up, they're going to come in with the final set of plans, likely that you guys will use Woodard and Curran again and review the plans and be the kind of gatekeeper between them, Woodard and Curran, building department, and then that flow will happen pretty quick. It's one building. I mean, there's a decent amount of site work they have to do, obviously, that they'll have to work with Woodard and Curran before they
But
get to it.
again, today, all the information that they've submitted and Woodward and Curran has reviewed has been approved.
Yeah.
Or met the standards
Yeah.
that they've.
And they've even jumped ahead on, they've got the O&M plan that they, after we closed, they
Yes.
got that to Woodard and Curran, and they're excited with that.
Yeah, we're in good shape, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, actually, but the only other thing, plan review at some point, prior to handing them into the building department, will you be doing some of that too, so that we review outside? You know, a work schedule for the building department?
In the final plan review?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we doing a 30-day building?
I've got the 45-day. The building department, as well as the DPW and the board's engineer, gets the full plan set and has 45 days to get their heads together and see what issues there may be out there.
Again, I've done this before. I think for the public, the findings, the procedural history of the findings, et cetera, are pretty boilerplate unless there's a desire on the public to go through all of that process. I'm suggesting maybe what we should do is go to the conditions, the decision
Sure.
conditions, and rather than perhaps read each in its entirety verbatim, we can do a synopsis.
Yeah. We can do this.
Just that, basically, and then, like that, like the one on the plan, it's lengthy, but it's, we can look at the, key points on it.
Yeah, I can go through each of them. I mean, this is all on things I've been doing for years and kind of developed it, and some of them are more specific to Scituate, where I've done a bunch of permits now. So if the board wants, I can kind of start at the top of the conditions and kind of
Yeah.
summarize.
Then if there's any questions, you can.
Yeah, and then we can always go back to property description and any of the findings or anything too. So first condition, and I'm catching typos as I go, and I will proof tomorrow before I send it back for John's signature as well. So the first one just says the conditions supersede, the first condition is that this is the newest permit and supersedes all the prior permits and approvals, and where there's a conflict that this one's going to control. The second one essentially is a defining thing that, look, this project is approved based upon the plans you received, and that's what the approval is based on, as well as the final site plans that will be coming in, which have to conform to those plans, which means that if they want to change those plans, they're going to have to come back, but it's just kind of setting that marker there. The condition 3 is that they have to go. I'm going to miss you so much.
I know. So, the problem I had with that paragraph
That
2
too?
is that there were so many plans, and I'm wondering,
I define them above.
as defined above it.
Yes, it's capitalized, it's a defined term, and I define it with a dated plan under property description 1, probably.
Okay, so you said it, so when, at
Yes.
the end, as revised during the public hearing,
Yep,
you
So-
define the final site plans. Was
Yep.
defined, but you said the final site plan is defined below.
Well, that's because the final site plan, we haven't seen yet, that's the next one that we get.
yeah, the final,
That's
the
number
regular
4.
plan, so number 1 defines plans, not final site
And
plan.
they're outlined
I'm
on
looking at number 2.
section 2.1.
Yeah, which
Are we
is,
looking at the same page?
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, so
Decisions and control?
the final
I just
section
never
will
seen it.
have some
You're looking at
additional
a red line,
information
Sarah,
we
we're
haven't
looking at the
received.
clean version.
Oh, okay.
So that's why the
Let me
pagination
pull
is
that
off.
out.
Do you want me to give you, do you have a better version to look at?
I have a clean version.
Okay, the
I
clean
did that.
There
version,
were like 5
You have extra
versions.
pages?
I started printing them all.
What I did
But-
was, I have a few copies of it, I did a compare, so it's kind of the
You want
last
the
tweak
clean or do you
between
want
ours
the-
and
I'll
and
take
I
a
have a
clean
clean.
copy if you
Who
have.
wants to come?
Section 2-1 defines the site plans by their title, prepared by SciTech as revised on July 10th.
Yep,
And those are the plans, capital P.
okay,
And that's what I refer to in condition 2.
all right, so I see that now into the final one, clean one. Okay.
We made it through 2.
I know. 37 more to
31
go.
more to go.
Next time Sarah's gonna sit right next to me, and I'll just step.
I only have a couple.
I'm sure.
You sure?
I appreciate every last one. Number 3, they have to get a final approval by Mass Housing. That's pretty straightforward. They go through a lengthy, probably more lengthy than they'd like, process where Mass Housing reviews the project again, and makes them jump through a whole bunch of new hoops, including, I think, a second appraisal, right, now? Or do you guys?
Yeah, that's an issue right now, and basically you gotta get a commitment from the bank to
Right.
build the project, that's the important thing. And they may ask for an appraisal.
Number 4 is a big condition for the town staff that's going to be reviewing this, as well as the engineer, because it kind of sets, because we're outside of subdivision and we're outside of zoning, it just kind of sets forth a process whereby they're going to get all the plans they need, all the final ones, all the engineering, everything, get it to the relevant entities, the Woodard and Curran, DPW, building inspector, board's engineer. They're gonna look at it for consistency with the regular plan and for standards and best management practices, all the other good stuff, and that if they have a problem with it, they've got 45 days to let them know.
And that can reset if they do it, the 45.
Yeah, if there's a defect in it, then yeah, then it resets, so. Number 5 is what we were just talking about with the architectural plans, because they had it just kind of a sketch. Now they're gonna have something a little bit more color to it, so to speak. And you guys will have 45 days. And that's an administrative review, so that's not a public hearing, that's at a regular meeting. They're just really looking at it to make sure it matches up with what your expectations were based upon the plans that they gave you. Yeah, nothing significant there. Obviously, if it's radically different building, they can be raised at that time, but it's really more of a kind of checking the box to make sure that they presented a plan that it looks like what they had promised they would do. Landscaping plan, same thing. This one has, number 6, has a little bit more detail because there was a little bit more discussion about it and some neighborhood questions about it. They're gonna do, again, you're gonna have an administrative review of the landscaping plans. They hadn't set in stone because they're working with some of the neighbors on how they're going to address some of those lights, the car lights particularly, but also other visual impacts. Fencing, are they gonna do bushes, are they gonna do shrubs? And you gave them, I think the decision of the board at the time was, hey, let's give them some room to roam, figure out what they wanna do there, come back with those plans, and you guys take a look just to make sure that it's fine. Nothing, obviously, they have to use best efforts to work it out with the neighbors, and it has to be a reasonably complete plan, but.
And so, Jay, just for myself, but everyone's information, that won't be its own hearing, but that will appear on Susan's agenda
Just
at
a
a regularly scheduled meeting.
Correct.
The public will have the ability to see that we're discussing that portion of the project that night, and they'll be able to come and hear what goes on there and see those plans in advance.
Absolutely, and if they're radically disappointed in some way, I mean.
I
don't
imagine
expect-
we'll hear about it.
I
Yeah.
imagine you will, I mean, I think it'd be unrealistic to expect that everyone will have 100% meeting of the minds, but if they can address some of those things in a reasonable fashion, again, the project is what the project is, and they're trying to limit, they've made a commitment to, in the parking lot, to limit lights on the south side, and then over in the corner towards Gloria's house to do some work, and then over on the north side to do some work, so that's kind of what you're going to be looking for, in addition to some other details that they're working out on the.
I think there's boilerplate here that doesn't, but I think the applicant, the pertinent sentence from my way of thinking, is the applicant is hereby directed to work with said neighboring property owners to achieve consensus on screening and buffering to the maximum extent feasible. I mean, we're all
doing
in
that,
agreement
so-
that which was committed to at that last meeting is here in our decision.
Number 7 was a to-do item as well that I picked up in the notes from either our last session or the one before. There's not a school bus stop situation. There might be nothing. The school department is happy enough with the shoulder there and fine, but they volunteered to speak to the school department and work that out. Sometimes the school department will say, okay, go talk to our bus company and figure that out. That's up to them. So, and they've just got to give you evidence. They made a little tweak to this, which was fine with me, that they're gonna, some evidence that they've communicated that with the school department. That worked for me.
Well, I was wondering if it might be prudent to consider adding in some language that, I mean, I don't know if the local police might be required or the DPW. It is a state highway and, you know, it's a pretty, there's been a lot of discussion about the speeds that people go on that. So I would, you know, hate to just simply rely on the school department with, you know, without that added input.
I think that's fair. My guess is that they pick up other people on Route 3A and have some kind of protocol with respect to the police. So I imagine that whatever they do is going to be consistent with that. But
I think the big difference on this, Jay, as I see it,
yeah.
is where you pick up 1 or 2 kids on the street, now you may be picking up, you know, 8 or 10 or 15 kids,
Well,
or
you've got-
60,
We get the same thing in other streets.
yeah.
The street when you pull into your street, the bus stop at the end of the high school.
Right, but I'm not, my street's not a state highway, that's my
Mary's
concern.
Lane.
Yeah,
Street.
but that's what I'm saying, is that
believe
there
it's still a
there
bus
may
stop at
be
the end.
some need to consult with either the police or the state highway department or whatever, given,
So why don't I say the applicant is directed to work with the school department as well as the police department as is necessary.
or any other, whatever, how you want to phrase it, as necessary.
Or we-
Honestly, I think everybody just wants to make sure it's safe.
Right, but we also don't want to start putting things in the application or in the permit that aren't clear or giving them a list of
That's
boxes
why
to
it
check
says-
that
As necessary.
as necessary.
Yeah, so it'll read now, the applicant is directed to work with the Scituate School Department, comma, as well as the police department as may be necessary, comma, to designate. So if the school department says, I don't know, check with the police department, or if the school department says, this is what we've worked out with the police department,
Yeah.
then I think that they can give that done. So, number 8's pretty easy, pre-construction meeting, and then other scheduling of meetings with the engineers once every 3 months. For a project like this, I think that makes some sense, that kind of spacing. They may decide some other schedule once they get going. I think that's between the 2 engineers and the contractor to figure that out. Number 9 is lighting, cut-off lighting to mitigate to the maximum extent possible light pollution as well as light spill. They've agreed to comply with the provisions of the Scituate zoning bylaw, so as it applies to that, so I think that's a good thing. Obviously, and I think everyone's being pretty realistic. I think the exterior lighting certainly is going to comply with all the dark sky stuff. There's going to be lights on in windows that people don't see currently, and I imagine that it's something that people would rather not see, but it is what it is. So, number 10, completely boilerplate. It's just what the final site plans in terms of construction mitigation plans, erosion control, stockpiling of materials, trucking routes, all those other good things. Obviously, trucking routes is pretty easy because it's coming in right off of 3A, but the police department may suggest certain times. And for that, there's going to be a lot of material obviously brought to the site, so the police department may work with them on that. Cutting and clearing plan, other items. 11 is just the building commissioner has to get evidence that there's been some approval from the water division for the connection to those utilities. Number 12 is that the building department has to receive evidence of their groundwater discharge permit from the state. What is the status of that, Bob? Or did they put it on the back burner a little bit?
No, they're bringing it back, I think it's a month away.
Okay. 13 is with respect to the wetlands, they have a superseding order out there. I'm guessing they'll go back to DEP and ask them to amend that. DEP may or may not send them back to the Concom because there's been some changes to the project. Looks like less impacts than the other project, so it's likely that I think it's 50-50 depending upon who reviews it at DEP. Sometimes they'll see just a radically changed project and say go back to the local. Sometimes they'll say lesser impacts, we'll just amend our SOC. Either way, this condition covers either scenario. So just gotta figure that piece out, which they would have to do anyway. They wouldn't get past the building commissioner anyway.
So just to clarify, so they do have to go back to DEP with the new plans?
Yeah, that will be their starting point. Would be
The DEP has a
DEP.
plan change policy that we have to follow.
Okay,
Right.
I was wondering where that's at.
Yeah, I mean, they could, if they wanted to, go straight back to the Conservation Commission. If I were them, I wouldn't, because there's lesser impacts, and I think there's a good argument to be made that with the lesser impacts, even though the floodplain has changed a little bit, that the DEP should keep jurisdiction. I know some DEP reviewers will say, no, too many changes, send it back. But then it's just in the Concom's hand, it's obviously a little more time for them, but either way, they've got to check that box. 14 picks up the emergency access stuff. I tried to capture all of it in one paragraph essentially about the gated access. The fire department still has to decide exactly where they want those gates, what the Knox box is, and how the access works. It's not open in the rear of the building to regular traffic. They get to use the pervious materials such as turf stone, all those things that we reviewed over the last couple sessions. So this plan obviously in many ways is a huge improvement with respect to the emergency access. So I tried to capture all that there.
Do they have under this, it says snow plowers will have access to the emergency access drive. Will they have access to the keys?
Yes.
The Knox box keys?
Yeah, I would assume so.
Says it right in here.
Does it say?
Well, it has that.
Emergency access shall at all times be free of obstruction, shall be plowed promptly after snowfall.
Right, but that's,
Zooms out there.
but I was talking about the keys.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Sarah, yeah, because
Because it
the
doesn't
property
say-
Well,
management.
the property management company's gonna have.
Which is a half hour away, if I understood from the
No, but the
meeting.
fire
They'll
department-
have them on site.
No.
The fire department has one on site.
And
Do
the
you
property
think the fire
management-
department's gonna be,
property
hello?
management
It
company
snowed
has to-
last night, we'd like to
Didn't-
borrow your keys.
The property management company
No, no.
has to arrange for the snow plowing to be
Yeah.
done, so they have to make
It'll be on
provisions
site,
for them to be
yeah.
allowed
Yeah.
to have access.
But the fire department's key is on site already all the time.
Oh, is it?
Locked up in a, that's a Knox box.
I don't know.
It's always on
It's
site.
just
It's
a
not here, it's
safety
there.
box, it's on the building
Oh,
itself.
I see, I
So
thought
if they
the fire
show-
department had them at their
No,
fire.
it's in
No,
there.
no, they have it on site.
fire truck can get there.
So if any of the fire department, they have a key to open up this box, they get, the key will open up all the keys, all the locks on
Got
the
it.
Keys to
building.
the keys.
Okay.
15 is pretty basic, just drainage stuff. It's gonna be part of the final site plan, so Woodward and Carmen will review it. They've already reviewed most of it. I'm sure there'll be some additional detail as the plans develop, and they'll take a look at it. 16, fire safety plan, just basic, making sure the fire department's happy with all that, pretty straightforward. That fire safety room issue, that was more adds by these guys in terms of what that kind of plan level detail is. 17, pretty straightforward, kind of in a DEP permit. They gotta comply with that and just give us evidence with that. 18 is things that you've all seen before. They've given us a list of waivers. The way I like to deal with waivers under a 40B is not to have like a lengthy list. Some attorneys that do this we'll have a lengthy list. My concern about that when we have a lengthy list is that we miss one
Right.
that they need, and, or they missed one, and we didn't put it in, and they really need it, and then we gotta, everyone's gotta wait and hold up construction because the building commissioner catches it. Look, most of the waivers that they need are dimensional related, and they're, we can look down at the plan and see what they are.
Yeah.
So that, I like to kind of give more of a boilerplate there of like, look, we approved the plans, whatever waivers you need dimensionally for that, you get them. And it's just a little easier, and it covers them all in one fell swoop. If you had an issue with any of them, we would have picked up on them early on. And then I say what waivers are not given. We don't give anything beyond 40B, and I don't think they've requested anything beyond 40B. We don't give them any waivers of the inspectional fees, and then anything not waived is enforceable. So that's how I like to deal with it. To me, it's always been easier for the engineers and in a project like this with the length of your bylaws throughout the town, the list would be 6 pages long. And my experience is that I try as hard as I can, I've always missed one, or they've already always missed one, or someone else misses one. So it's just a little easier. 19, we talked about a little bit before. This is really just the affordable housing stuff. They actually had some good input on this. It's pretty basic. It's 15% affordable units. The difference in a rental as opposed to a for sale is those affordable units move around a little bit. I did not get into how that happens. That's all going to be in the regulatory agreement. And that is when someone goes over income, they can stay if they want, but the next available unit, and Bob, is it unit by type, number of bedrooms?
It's the next available one. Next available unit that's on the market has to become affordable.
Even if a
Might be a
3-bedroom?
different unit, yeah.
So if a unit goes, if someone goes over income, the next available unit becomes the affordable unit. So there's kind of, they'll move around the project, whereas.
So in other words, unit number 4 is not always unit
Right.
affordable number 4.
Affordability floats.
As
The
long as you-
percentage will always be the
They
same,
have your
but
25%.
like you say, the units are gonna move
Yeah,
around, fill in
and that's
themselves.
always looked at in your financial, annual financial certified, plan of mass housing, reviews that every year.
Yeah, so
They have to be in compliance.
everyone's got to be certified. There's much more work to do. Now, sometimes there's a little bit of a gap because someone will go over income, but there's no other unit available. So it might not technically be 25%, but the next unit that comes up, then
You have to
that's.
be 140% of your income of where you were when you went in. That's a pretty big jump for somebody who maybe takes a new job and all of a sudden has a much higher income. Doesn't happen very often, but it's possible that it does, and then you gotta, they become a market tenant, the next person becomes a fourth.
So that's all going to be in the regulatory agreement. We're not a party to that regulatory agreement. Mass Housing does that. They've actually done a much better job with those agreements than I think they used to. Pretty tried and true stuff. 20,
So can I, I'm sorry.
you may.
PB. So some of them are 2-bedroom, 2-bath, some of them are 1-bedroom, 1-bath. So is that the way, is there a
There's some
breakdown in
3-bedrooms
terms
as
It's
well.
of?
proportionate
I
to the
thought there
mix,
was, but I
yeah.
couldn't see it on this
There are
map.
a much smaller amount, there are some
I
3-bedrooms.
think that's described above
Oh, yeah.
in project description. We say how
Yeah.
many of each.
It's
are-
supposed to be proportionate to the unit mix itself. So if we have to have 10% threes, so we have to have 3% affordable threes out of the 10, 2.5%, 25% of that, 25% of the twos, 25% of the ones. Now, that can change, as we said, over time, but that's the other study.
20 is something that I think we'll rely on Bob a little bit to help us, but Brad Washburn will probably do it as well as some of the affordable housing folks in town. You don't automatically get a local preference. You used to be able to just declare, hey, we want 70% set aside for Scituate residents. Now you have to justify that you need a local preference, and we'll, the local planning staff will, and Bob's drafted a bunch of these in the past and knows how to help with that. Well, if the town staff wants to push for local preference, it's up to them to kind of demonstrate why there's a unique situation here, and they can get a local preference without upsetting the apple cart with opening up these units across the region to folks in need.
It's
So,
usually a planning staff that looks at the data. The census won't be out for 2 years or a year, but they're looking at what's in town, and what the mix, what the affordable count is, how many people are low income. They have to make a case to DHCD. It's it's not difficult, but the town has to make the case. We don't care, we'll rent to local people if that's what we get, but it's really up to the town to say, yeah, we have a need in town. We hope they do, because we want to rent to local people, and we'll work with the town, with Brad or somebody else that says, as you say, you can look at these plans, I know the people who put them together in other towns, but you don't need to pay $20,000 for a planning consultant to write a local needs thing. You can pull some data together and send it in.
And the town has developed a lot of demographic data, so they should be able to
Yeah.
give it a try. I mean, it's a little harder to establish for a town like Scituate than some other towns, but there's enough data that they pull together for their affordable housing
To
plans
justify
to justify it, so. 21 is just essentially, you guys are gonna have a monitoring agent. We're not getting involved in who that is, it's gotta be approved by the subsidizing agency. 22 is their limited dividend entity, which means they have a profit limitation for rentals, no one ever goes over income. This is not the kind of project, they didn't get the land for a song, so.
A song, it's costing us good money.
that's-
But no, it's, actually, I have 2 cases that have gone over.
On the rental
excess
side?
profit. Yeah, and they're asking me how they get it back. I said, I've never been asked that question in 30 years. So it's possible, but
It's
it's,
rare.
if
Yeah.
you go over the limited dividend, you have to give the money to Mass Housing. They hold it in escrow for the project's health and economic health. And then if some years you're really hurting, there's a mechanism for giving you back that money, so you have a reasonable return. And as Mass Housing said to me just 2 days ago, we rarely have seen that request, so not too many people go over it. so.
This is a smaller project, maybe if it was a large rental project and the land basis was relatively low and there was a lot of equity in the project, you might see that, unlikely with a project of this size.
You gotta be in Needham, Wellesley, one of those Metro West towns where the rents are Brookline, where the rents are $5,000 a month. You might get to that point. I have yet to run numbers that show that somewhere, but you could get there. Not down here. I don't think the South Shore is gonna carry that kind of issue. But it's all in the regulatory agreement, so. it's all-
23 is that, we just asked them to help sign us. We have to fill out information, mostly from Brad's office or someone at the planning department, to get all the units counted. There'll be some signatures probably required by parties, so they'll help with that. 24 is really, it's kind of a covenant, like a subdivision covenant, is the way it's set up. It's not a bond. I mean, if they wanted to put up a bond, I suppose they could, and come back to you and ask for that. But it's essentially saying, you do the infrastructure, you get occupancy permits. Nothing more fancy than that. And
So in other words, until the infrastructure is complete, we're not opening up the building.
yeah, here it's easy because all the infrastructure, once the infrastructure is done for one unit, it's done for all the units.
Right, so that's.
So,
that's
yeah.
part
It's
of
more
it.
important than a subdivision where you have somebody at the end of a road and you haven't paved the road
Right.
or done anything, and they're sitting there with an occupancy permit. This building will, as Jay just said, you said it, all the infrastructure will be there before you can even open the door.
Because they have to, it's really
The
just the
fire access
driveway,
and all the
yeah, the
water.
drainage, utility, all that other good stuff. 25 is hours of operation. This is, I think, pulled from the last one you did. Pretty typical, pretty ordinary for what it is.
And these are all based on the Situate's,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, I don't know if it's based on your bylaw, it's what I've used before in Scituate.
yes,
So,
but I think it corresponds pretty well to that.
yeah, I think so. It's not an unusual list here at all.
Oh,
I'll do it more.
The bylaw doesn't have St. Patrick's Day on it?
that's understood.
That's,
And-
yeah, that's
and
not
suggestions
right.
might be another
Can't
one
do
of
any
the-
construction close to it.
The assemblyman would like to hear. During construction, the applicant shall maintain all feasible and reasonable means of dust control and shall collect all debris on a daily basis. No construction deliveries or other activities may occur on Sundays or on New Year's Day, Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, Christmas, or my birthday. No construction or deliveries may begin before 7 a.m. or continue past 6 p.m. unless approval in advance by the board. Notwithstanding the foregoing, interior construction that doesn't generate excessive noise may occur on weekday evenings until 10 p.m. and on Sundays from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Again, that's the kind of thing you might end up having a painter who goes to finish up a room and goes past the time, but you're not going to have a
Well, cleaning
jackhammer.
comes in,
Right.
You know,
but it's generally no power tools.
No.
And, you know, construction's a pain, there's a lot of site work out there, but the quicker it's done, the quicker the noise stops too. So it's always a balance, you try and be as protected as possible, but you also want them to get their job done, so it quiets down out there. 26, they're obviously gonna be continuing to maintain the building and the infrastructure. 27 is about snow removal, they gotta get it off as soon as possible. 28 kind of follows what we talked about in number 4 and throughout that the board's engineer. Sometimes in some towns, the town will have an engineer or a very active DPW director. Here in Scituate, we've generally relied on an outside engineer for the larger projects. So that's what I kept. They pay for our engineer. 30 is changes to the project have to follow the regulations, which means they have to give you a request for a change, and then you have 20 days to decide if it's substantial. If you decide it's substantial, like here, then you have 30 days to schedule a hearing. If you decide it's insubstantial, then it's just approved, or sometimes there's a little writing to address any kind of agreement on those things, but pretty straightforward. We're just asking them to follow the regulation. They got to record it, is 31. If they need to give us any easements, I'm not aware of any, but if they need to give us any, they'll give us those easements. I'll take a look at those, pretty straightforward. The permit runs with the land, which is typical of any other permit. If they want to assign or transfer the permit, they have to go through a regulatory process. We ask them to give us notice. Sometimes I've gotten into lengthy debates as to how much we can ask if they're just transferring assets and not transferring the permit. But they have to follow the regulations and give us notice, and these folks have made a commitment to work with us on that. So it's pretty standard. The state would look at who's running the show anyway, and that there's ongoing obligations under 40B because it's a rental project. You got 3 years to do this, get it done. You can get some extensions for good cause. Extensions are pretty easy, freely granted under 40B, really hard to deny an extension. And then 35 is what we would call a severability clause, that if any of these conditions are found to be wonky, the rest of them survive. And then 36 just says if you want to repeal it, you just got to do it by 40B.
And just, as we proceed, your dates of, I mean, do you plan on jumping right on this? Do you have a idea of when?
Well, we got these other state permits to get, so, you know, after this process is over, we got the DOT, we gotta get out on the highway, we got the DEP, we got, you know, both of those things. So those permits will take a few months, probably by the end of the year. We have 6 months to get our working drawings and get our bids. Sometimes we already have preliminary bids, but we need to finish all the drawings. So, you know, we're hoping to get in by late spring, you know, I don't know the set date, but sometime middle of 2019. Take a year, 14 months to build it, something like that, occupancy in 2020.
Any other questions? Jay, anything else you thought of?
No, I mean, this
Pretty
went,
much kind of,
yeah, this went pretty smoothly. We obviously had a lot of material to work with over the years, having seen this, so we're all pretty familiar with the site, but these guys made it pretty easy for me, and obviously the board's been through this with me before, so I think we're in good shape and ready to go. It's nice to have them agree to most of the conditions, so.
yeah, I mean, and keep in mind from the start of the project too, where we had started, where we ended up, two of you guys, you know,
Been a process.
listen, and we made some adjustments with fire access, neighbors, and, you know, through the whole thing, so the work continued right up to the end here.
We had to get it done before Sarah got off the board. We were under a lot of pressure.
Well, she wasn't gonna leave until that done.
And I'm sorry Jeff isn't here, but I want to compliment you. I think the movement that took place from what I think was a very nice building that you proposed in the beginning, but poorly sited in my mind for that location.
We appreciate it. We hated to do it because we love that building, but we heard what you said and, you know, we tried to accommodate, so. And we'll make this building, it won't be as fancy as that, because it's a different building type, but this will be very nice. And we're gonna own it and run it, so we're very pleased about that fact, because, you know, this is a big project for us, so we're happy about that.
And I think as an owner, operator of the property, you'll look to be a good neighbor, and I think that the neighbors can expect to have an open exchange of information as this goes forward.
Absolutely.
We look forward to it being in the inventory.
It'll be there. If it isn't, we'll fight very hard as a lion, of course it'll be on there. It's a nice count.
Yeah, it is good. Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, Sarah and Ed and I have been on this one for over 10 years, working on this site. So I'm glad to see it get pushed.
I just sent a text to our friend.
John, they had to bring in the closer.
Woman, that's a
Yeah.
Janet.
Oh, Sarah.
Yeah, that's right. Jen.
The closers.
A lot of people.
Finally getting credit for some units.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Motion?
Actually, do we have to take a vote on this also?
Oh, we have to- we're on
We have to vote on whether or not to grant that permit.
I would say
Referring to this.
grant it pursuant to the draft decision as amended. That could be a motion, and then what I will do, we had just a couple tweaks, and I'm gonna just screen it again for typos, and then I set it up for your signature, John, and I will email it back to Sue, and we'll be good to go. Then you file it with the town clerk and get these guys a copy.
So we have a motion.
Motion that the board grant approval to the 40B permit, an application presented by the applicant, drafted by Jay, which shall be amended to reflect some of the minor amendments that were discussed here tonight.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you very, very much. I'll pass that
Thank
on.
you.
Jeff's sitting here by the phone waiting for me to call.
Oh, is he?
He's with his son, who's a special needs kid, and he's got a class thing tonight, so he's got to be there.
You can have a little fun with them. Text me.
Holy, you know what?
Yep.
And Jeff was was on his absolute best behavior throughout all this.
Yeah, you know he can be a little tough, so he was
He's
trying to be
grown
on
up
his
a lot, Bob.
best behavior.
Yeah.
He's my son after all.
Yeah. All right, excellent. So I'll get this back to you, John, and Sue tomorrow morning, and we're all set, and then,
Sign it.
yeah. And then, look, Sarah, last,
Bye. Yeah, I was convinced in the beginning of this, it would be, my last decision would be a no. But you guys really turned it around, and I really have to compliment all of the neighbors that have, without your input, I don't think this project would be what it is today. And maybe you take that as a blame, but sooner or later, this was going to be built, I think, something. And I think everybody kind of figured that. We really dodged the big one, I thought, with the old project because it was rejected, but the state thought they knew better than the townspeople. And Housing Appeals Committee seems to do that a lot. So it was unfortunate that we got overturned, but I know you guys spent incredible amounts of money, incredible amounts of time, incredible amounts of emotion and energy. And I wish that more people who routinely criticize this board put 1/10 of what you put in to this. This town would be definitely better and there'd be a lot happier people. But you guys were amazing and you deserve a lot of credit. And I'm grateful to the applicant and your team to, make the project what it is. And I'll be looking forward to touring it when it's complete.
Well, I'd like to say something to the neighbors too, because I've been involved in well over 100 permits. And we've had very tough neighborhood, really uncivil neighborhood behavior in some of these so-called upper income towns. You guys have been great. my son's gonna be working with you, because I'm gonna be retired pretty soon. And so he looks forward to it, and we'll continue that for as long as it's necessary to get you the right kind of project. So we do appreciate all your input, because we actually listened and made some changes as a result of that. So that's great. I appreciate the dialogue.
And speaking of retirement, we'd also like to, after 11 years, thanks.
12 years plus.
12 plus years, Sarah is stepping down from the.
I want every nickel of it.
We'd certainly like to thank you for all your work and effort over the last 12 plus years.
Agreed, here, here.
Bye-bye. All my friends have TV. I won't have people stopping me at Maria saying, oh, I saw you on TV.
Well, you can have the last
Wait,
motion too.
it's
We have
Right.
a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I could do a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.